Well, I've always been favorable to God since I was a child. I'm a Catholic from Italy. My grandmother used to take me to Mass every morning when I was a child. I liked the idea of God. I liked the idea of the Supreme. I didn't take anything for granted. But I didn't find any reciprocation in the church. And the only reciprocation I really found was when I saw the devotees for the first time here in Amsterdam. I think it was a Koyananda Swami and two brahmacharis doing Harinam. And I was sitting in a cafe nearby here. And I said to my friend, wow, what's that? That's far out. And they said, oh, something from California, Hare Krishna. And the next day they brought someone to my house. His name was Alex Kulik from San Diego. And he brought me a Krishna book. And he showed me a picture of Prabhupada on the Krishna book. Prabhupada smelling the champak flower. And he said, this man is the most advanced person on this planet. He said, you have to be a vegetarian. I said, I'm already a vegetarian. He said, no gambling, a couple of other rules, not so important. So that was my introduction to Krishna. I was already 30 years old. So when I joined, I spent a year in Holland and I went to Italy. I was already 10 years older than the average age of the devotees, so I became a leader almost immediately. And I spent the first 5 years in India traveling in Bengal.
So I was raised as a Christian Catholic. Then when I had some questions, when I was studying to become a priest, then there were no answers, so I started to search east. I started to study Buddhism. Then when I went to India, I was 19 and a half. And then just when I landed in India, I landed in Bombay and I saw Prabhupada from far, like sitting very far. So I couldn't say it gave me an impression because I just saw someone sitting very far. And I remember the devotees, they had a question and answer booth. And later on I knew it was Giriraj Maharaj preaching to me, but at that time I was not into it like that. Then I spent a few months in India, in a Buddhist monastery, Kriya Yoga Ashram of Yogananda, his first disciple in Jagannath Puri. This is my biggest shame, to be in Puri, but not to know anything about Mahaprabhu or Krishna. Then when I came back to France, actually I came back to England, and every day I used to see the devotees in Oxford Street in London chanting, whether it was day or night, or rainy or sunny, they were always there, and I was saying, wow. I had some anger about karma. I was worried about karma. I was thinking, okay, those people, maybe they have the answer because they're chanting mantras all day, so they're not making any new karma, but what about the past karma? That was my big question. And then I was thinking, I should go to the temple. Then somehow I didn't go, went back to France. I was praying to Krishna, to God, because I had been raised as a Christian, then became a Buddhist, then impersonal yogi, so I was kind of mixed up. So I remember praying, my God, I don't even know anymore if you exist or not, but please, give me a sign. And then I took the train back to France, and then when I landed in France, I went down from the train. Right there on the platform, there was a devotee, a girl distributing magazines, back to Godhead. And then there was some guy bothering her, so I chased the guy away, and I asked her, what are you doing? She said, well, we're distributing those books about Krishna. And Krishna, I came back from India, that it sounded familiar. So I just picked up a magazine, changed station, went to see my mother, who was a very devout Catholic. And in the train, when I read the magazine, there was this picture of Prabhupada, the first time I saw him like that, in the picture, and I was very impressed. He looked so humble. Prabhupada with a hat and with some garland. And I thought, this person is very, very humble, but he looks very powerful. And when I read the magazine during the train, I thought, this is what I've been looking for. This is better than Buddhism or Mayavad or yoga or anything. Last time I saw my mother, I was preaching Buddhism to her. This time I started to preach Krishna to her, and she's very Catholic from top to bottom. So after a few days, it didn't work very nice between us. You know? So I said, look, Mom, I'm just going back to India. She said, no, you just came back from India. I said, yeah, but I want to find a real teacher. Because I was thinking I would not join in France, I would join in India, no, become a devotee there. And when I went to Paris, when I went to the Indian embassy, I was in the tube, and there was Indradyumna, who became Indradyumna Maharaj. And he was distributing books. And my mind told me, don't go next to that fellow, your independence is finished. And another voice told me, but anyway, in 2-3 days, you will be like him. So I waited and waited, because I'm from the country, I don't know Paris, I don't know the map of the tube, so. But he was sitting next to the map, he was standing there and then distributing magazine. I thought, wow, he's not going to get away from here. So let me try to go and incognito to see the map. But I was like the typical target, I was wearing a longi, a purple kurta, and Rudraksha beads, Lord Shiva's beads, and shaven head and beard, like the ideal target. And he didn't try to sell me a magazine, he just gave me an invitation. He said, do you speak English? I said, yes. I said, oh, we have an Indian temple. He spotted, okay, this guy's coming from India, so let me catch him through that line. And then I said, very good. And he said, oh, we have a Sunday program, why don't you come? I said, yeah, sure. Picked up with the card in my pocket, then did my thing. And when I came back to my grandmother's house in the evening and I checked the map at the back of the invitation card, I saw this is just 2 blocks away. So next morning, not in the afternoon, I didn't come to the Sunday afternoon, I came in the Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, I knocked at the door, and the girl who sold me the magazine a week before, she opened the door. And I told her, oh, I came, I guess, to chant and pray with you. And I came in, bowed down, it was arti going on, and you bow down in the temple, like in India. And immediately, after that, some devotees spotted me, and then after, it was breakfast, prasadam, and started to preach to me. Guru Guranga, who became my temple president in Switzerland for 4 years. And then Prabhupada came, I think that was in May, Prabhupada came in August, and he installed Radha Krishna deities. And then coming from that yogic background, I remember the first time I saw Prabhupada sitting on the Vyasasana, I said, he looks like a mountain of power. Now I was thinking in those terms. But when Prabhupada started to speak, I saw there was so much compassion coming from him. I said, no, it's not a mountain of power only, it's a mountain of love and compassion. That really struck me. And until now, I had a hard time not to worship the deity of Lord Jagannath, which was the local deities in Paris at that time. Because for me, it looked like some Amerindian totem, and I remember praying, oh my Lord, no, I could never believe you looked like that. But if Prabhupada said so, then you must look like that. But really. And when he installed the deities and gave a lecture, Prabhupada said, the deities of Jagannath is not very beautiful. I said, okay, it was not an offense.
I remember coming to the temple and beautiful kirtan, beautiful sound, very sacred kirtan was happening. Probably Yamuna was singing. Then we sat down, and all of a sudden, the devotees fell flat on the floor. So being very polite young girl, we did the same for the first time of our life. But I was very curious, and I wanted to see what was happening. Why are they doing that? And just putting my head a little up, I saw 2 beautiful golden feet passing by my head. And I wanted to see to who these feet were belonging. And for the first time, at least in this life, I saw Srila Prabhupada. It was a very extraordinary scene. At the same time, he was looking, we have seen, he was looking very aristocratic. And so to me, he looked like the emperor of the world. But at the same time, he looked like the most humble the most humble sage in the creation. And I was so surprised to see these two very different antinomic qualities in one person.
I remember it was in the New Zealand Herald. There was a picture of Srila Prabhupada on the front page of the newspaper in 1972. It said, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, opens the Hare Krishna temple in Mount Eden, New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. And I remember as a young person, I was about 14 years of age at the time, and I was still at school. But I remembered something about this Prabhupada, this Hare Krishna, and a temple being established in New Zealand attracted my mind. I didn't know why. I had imagined that a temple would be something like, it would be up in the mountains and these beautiful domes and things like that. So I remember a friend of mine, we were riding home from school, and he said, have you seen the Hare Krishna temple? I said, no, I heard about it. Let's go there. So after school, we rode home, and we stopped off at the Hare Krishna temple. And it wasn't this temple that had big domes or anything like that. It was a simple little house in the suburbs of Auckland. And we walked in, and this wonderful devotee, her name is Satyavati. Satyavati was the pujari, and she welcomed us and sent us into the temple room. And there was this very big Vyasa-san, Srila Prabhupada's picture on it, and it gave us Simply Wonderfuls, sat us down and fed us Simply Wonderfuls. So this kind of began a process for me as I was growing. I would continuously go to the Hare Krishna temple on my way home from school. And the devotee that was there, his name was Tusta Krishnadas. And I can say that he was my Varna Vadarshaba Guru, that he, I would sit down and he would read Krishna book to me. So this is my education. Consequently, my interest in school started to diminish. And it came to time when Srila Prabhupada was coming to New Zealand. He's actually coming back. I didn't see him the first time, but in 1974, he came back to establish the new temple in Gribblehurst Road. And that was when I saw Srila Prabhupada for the first time in the flesh. I knew that in my heart, he was my guru. And so by this time I was also chanting 16 rounds a day and having a lot of fun with my young friends who also became devotees. So that was the very, very first time that I came in contact with Srila Prabhupada in person. At that time, a short while after that, I was initiated as Kedara Das, one who is easily pleased. So I feel very blessed that I got that initiation from Srila Prabhupada.
When I first saw Prabhupada, that was in 1972. He came to the Amsterdam temple, and there was we had organized a special, Prabhupada was making a tour through Europe, and part of the tour was Amsterdam. The Amsterdam temple was very new. It was sitting in the worst part of Amsterdam. It was the red light district, right on the edge of it. But Amsterdam was like San Francisco. It was like the European counterpart of San Francisco. It was like a hippie mecca, so there were thousands and thousands of young kids streaming into Amsterdam, especially during the summer. And it was a big thing. I mean, you know, you had a lot of, let's say, the flower power celebrities, the Timothy Learys and Richard Alperts and gurus from India that were coming to Amsterdam to give their speeches and lectures and so on. So the city was really, it was blossoming with kind of hippie, semi-spiritual activities. And so Prabhupada arrived at that time. I think we had about 15 or 20 devotees in the temple. The temple was an old garage. I mean, it was really a shabby place. And in fact, it was totally unworthy of receiving Srila Prabhupada. When he first saw the building, then when he arrived in Amsterdam, he was received at the airport, he was taken to his hotel, and then he was taken to the temple. And when he first saw the temple building from the exterior, he said, "Who is responsible for this?" So it's not, you know, exactly a heartwarming welcome for the devotees who've, you know, worked for months and months and months to prepare this event. And then, you know, the spiritual master came, and the first thing he did is, what is this? But of course, I mean, Prabhupada was, yeah, super appreciative of everything that was going on and all the efforts that devotees were making to, you know, make a big event for him and to, he was on television, it was a national event, he was in the 8 o'clock news when he arrived at the airport. He stayed in Amsterdam for 3 days, and we had one of the days, I think it was the last day, there was an event in the Vondelpark. You know, the Vondelpark is the counterpart of the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury. You know, so Amsterdam, San Francisco were like kind of twin cities with kind of similar things happening. And so Prabhupada went to the Vondelpark, and that was, you know, full of hippies and people, you know, playing drums and playing guitars and smoking dope and doing all the things that were going on as an extent. This was in '72, so this is a few years after the Summer of Love, but it was still hippiedom, especially Europe was a little behind San Francisco, I think 1 or 2 years later. So everything that happened there happened here, you know, 1 or 2 years later. And, but it was a big success, although Prabhupada also said, you know, looking at the crowd, that, you know, these were a little bit doped out hippies. So he said, well, let's not spend too much time on preaching philosophy, and let's just have kirtan and distribute prasadam. So I think at one point Shyamasundar was giving a lecture, and, you know, was giving kind of a highbrow lecture with a lot of Sanskrit in it. And so Prabhupada cut him short and started playing the kirtan and said later on, let's not waste our time talking highbrow philosophy and just chant Hare Krishna and distribute prasadam.
Well, I was serving in Italy, Sankirtan leader. Prabhupada came to France, but they wouldn't let me go to see him because I wasn't senior enough. Actually, I was collecting too much. So I made up my mind that I was going to go to India to see Prabhupada. So somehow I managed to get away. It's a long story there. But there was a GBC resolution that any devotee who wanted to go to India should be facilitated. So based on that, I convinced Bhagavan to let me go. So end of October '76, I went to Vrindavan to see Prabhupada. I never seen him before. So I arrived in Vrindavan at this time in the evening. And I came through the side door of the Krishna Balaram temple. Prabhupada was sitting under the tree, very famous tree. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I felt this wonderful feeling in my heart. So I stayed in Vrindavan for about a month and a half. He was giving classes every day. And the temple commander said, Ananda, if you stay here, work with me, I'll recommend you for second initiation, because I'd only got first initiation by mail 6 months before. So we made that deal. So Prabhupada gave me second initiation. So it was a big initiation ceremony, but only 2 of us were getting Gayatri, myself and and Gurukul boy. So when I went in to see Prabhupada, he paid my dandavats, sat down, and then he put the Brahmin thread around my neck, and he said, do you know how to count? I said, yes, Prabhupada. I didn't even finish saying, yes, Prabhupada, show me. So I was so excited I made a mistake with my fingers. So he leant over with his left hand and gently slapped me on my wrist. He said, not like that, like this. So that was one lesson I learned, you know, don't be too smart. This person can read your mind. So I got my second initiation, and then every day Prabhupada would have Bhagavatam class. In the evening he would sit under the tree, and there was a new devotee had joined, a Swami from some other group. Prabhupada initiated him, Prem Yogi, and he was translating the Bhagavatam into Hindi. So there was a session where Prabhupada, I think it was Yashodananda, would read it in English, and Prem Yogi would read it in Hindi, and Prabhupada would listen. So this was the daily program. I did get to go on one morning walk with him, and the morning walk was inside the premises, mainly in the Gurukul building. They were building the Gurukul. Krishna Balaram temple was already finished, but the Gurukul was under construction. So we were going around the construction, up and down the scaffolding, here and there, and there was this constant monologue from his manager, GBC, how wonderful everything was. Prabhupada, this is wonderful, that is wonderful. Prabhupada didn't say anything, he just kept walking, tick, tick, tick. After about half an hour of this propaganda, he picked up his cane and he stuck it into the wall, and the plaster crumbled off. And he said, is this wonderful? Tick, tick, tick. Then he saw some cement left out in the wet. Is that wonderful? Then a pile of dirt. Is that wonderful? He made time stop. It was so much pressure. And in the end, there was nothing left to do but to cry. And to his credit, the GBC started crying, the local GBC. Tears came to his eyes. But I learned my lesson, which is hype doesn't cut it with his divine grace. So I learned that lesson.
Yes, in Paris, every morning, Prabhupada would go on a morning walk. And then I remember one time, we saw some people walking their dogs. And Prabhupada became very grave. And then, I cannot swear, but it looked like there were some tears like brimming in his eyes. And he looked and he said, most of those people, next lives, they will change. They'll be on the other side of the leash. And he looked like so much, speaking with so much compassion, like he said, like, so unfortunate. They have this human birth and they're walking the dog, but because of attachment, next life, most of them will be on the other side of the leash. They'll be in a dog form. And I was saying, oh my God. But Prabhupada, when he spoke that, was not like contemptuous or all those karmis. It was like so full of compassion. And it really, you could really feel that, and I felt very impressed. Then we went to a lake, au Jardin, Bois de Boulogne, Bois de Vincennes, which was next to the temple. And a devotee was bringing back some old prasad, like leftover prasad, to give to the ducks in the lake. And Prabhupada pointed to one little duck with his cane. He said, you see that one who's quacking the most? No, he's getting the attention. He says, this is what you should do with Krishna, the spiritual master. The devotee who's quacking the most, asking, Gurudev, Gurudev, no, he gets. Just like this duck, automatically the devotee's attention is going to him. I remember that, like little snippets of teaching like that. Because Prabhupada was not speaking so much during the morning walk. He was walking, and it was actually hard for us to keep space, keep up with him, because he was walking at such a strong pace.
It was in the first temple in Londonderry Place. This temple was looking very mystical. Shyamasundar had put a purple carpet, and he had used red oak beams from California, so it was all curved. And the deities were there, incense. So Shyamasundar wanted the temple to look like a Buddhist cave. Prabhupada sat on the Vyasa and he started looking at everyone's eyes. And when I caught his glance, I became so surprised. And I could see in his glance that this personality knows me much better than I do. And it's not from that life. And it was so much compassion in his eyes. It was like he knew our suffering, he knew our questioning, but he had the solution. So it was extremely powerful. And I didn't know why. I felt some tears coming. Then I was wondering why these tears, you know. That was so powerful, and I understood it was because of his compassion. So he sat on the Vyasa, he gave a lecture, and amazingly, in his lecture he answered all the questions we had without us asking anything.
We've had waves of gurus coming to the West, Sachit Ananda, and you know, many of them, and no disrespect, I'm sure they were all, most of them sincere people, but Prabhupada was of a completely different caliber, and his philosophy was so completely different. You know, the typical wishy-washy stuff and flowery language, you know, that was not something that Prabhupada was speaking. You know, he was speaking plain truth, and in those days, you know, plain truth, in one sense, in the hippie kind of community, sounded quite harsh. But on the other hand, because it was so rather extreme and different from everything else, it also kind of connected again. Because, you know, the hippie movement was all about liberation from the material world, basically. You know, except that they thought you could get liberation with drugs and free sex and a little bit chanting of mantras. And of course, Prabhupada said, well, the first two parts, you know, the free sex and the drugs, forget about that and just focus on the chanting of mantras. But the whole idea of liberation from the material world, which was really, you know, Prabhupada's focus, like, you know, this material world is not a place we are not here to enjoy. And that's a radically different departure from everything else that we heard. I mean, I've been studying Indian philosophy since I was 13, 14 years old, just out of interest. I've read a lot of books from Vivekananda, who of course is a Mayavadi. And Vivekananda, I mean, is a traditional Mayavadi, and he talks about liberation and the material world and so on. But it's all different, you know. Nobody else stated that this material world is really not a good place. It's a bad place, and it's here, and it's structurally bad. It's not just incidental or temporarily bad. It's just by its very nature, the way it's set up. And this whole philosophy that, and this was my big, my personal big problem, the problem I was struggling with, because I was converted to Mayavadi philosophy. You know, I believed that there is God, but God is impersonal, as the Mayavadis are teaching. And in the end, we're all one, and in the end, we are God. And I could not reconcile that with the fact that we are suffering. You know, this is just doesn't make any sense. How come, if we are God, and we have simply forgotten it, how can't I just, by my own desire, wish to remember it and elevate myself out of this miserable material world and be in bliss? And why am I suffering? So these two I could not reconcile. And Prabhupada was the first teacher who said it plainly. No, you're here because you're, not because we're God, because we're servant of God. And at some time in our infinite eternal history, we have decided to turn away from God and, you know, to try to enjoy ourselves independently and in a way competing with God, trying to become God. So that's the first time, even though in Christian philosophy this is quite common. But the way the Christians explain it is not very good, you know, and the story of Adam and Eve, you know, I mean, it's nice mythology, but it's, you know, in terms of historical reality, it doesn't make any sense. And of course, you know, when Satan seduced Eve to eat from the forbidden fruit, his explanation was, if you eat from this tree, you'll become, this is the tree of good and evil, and you'll become as powerful as God, as knowledgeable as God. So here the story is that we are competing with God. And in Indian philosophy, that was never in Mayavadi philosophy, that's not the case. You know, we're here just because we're in illusion, because it's a lila. Not because we are competing with Krishna, because we did something wrong. So Prabhupada was the first one who said, yeah, you did something wrong. You may not remember it, but at one point we decided not to serve Krishna, but to serve ourselves. And that's been a process, and later on you learn more about how that's a gradual process. It's not just that, you know, from one day to the next you're in Vaikuntha, and then 2 minutes later you want to be in Auschwitz because you think that's a great place. It doesn't work like that. It's much more complicated. But the distinct difference in Prabhupada's philosophy is this plain-spoken fact that this material world is not here for your enjoyment. We are here to learn how to serve Krishna again in this human form of life, and you have the opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead. And so that's for me, when he answered that question also, my Mayavadi dilemma, how can we be God and be suffering in this world, you know, which didn't make any sense at all. He resolved that dilemma, and for me then, from then on, Vaisnava philosophy was it.
I went back to Switzerland because I was staying there at the time. I only stayed a few months in France and I moved to Switzerland where I was there for 4 years. So Prabhupada came to Switzerland. And I remember Prabhupada speaking in one lecture which would really impress me. He said, no, the devotee, he wants to install Krishna in his heart on a big diamond throne, a pure heart. So we should do like that. We should clean our heart so much by chanting, you know, Hare Krishna, so that Krishna, you know, comes in our heart, but our heart should be clean. And then how do you clean your heart? By making it like very spotless, by, you know, giving up all your anarthas, all the unwanted things, and praying and engaging all the time in his service. And I remember I asked Nitai, he was a Prabhupada servant at the time, Nitai Prabhu, and then I asked him, did Prabhupada ever say where he's going to be preaching in the next life? And Nitai told me, well, I never heard that question. I could go and ask him right now. So he went right into Prabhupada's room and came out. Prabhupada said, I'm going to preach in the lower planets in the next life. And I was like, completely fazed. So much compassion. This is what struck me most with Prabhupada was his compassion. It's like bottomless. He was like willing to do anything to please Mahaprabhu and to please his spiritual master. But when he said, I'm going to preach to the lower planets, I was thinking, how can someone do that? That was really, really, you know, striking. Mm.
It was in Russell Square, and it was winter, so we had big coats, and we were just maybe 4 of us, no more. And I was just walking on the right side of Prabhupada, and all of a sudden he stopped, and he became very intense. He looked at me very deeply, and I thought, he's going to say it, that mystical sentence, he's going to say it. So I was looking at him also, and it was for a few long seconds, you know. And then he opened his mouth, and I thought, that's it, I will know he's my spiritual master. And then he said, are you cold? And then I looked at him very disappointed, and he was playing with us. And I told him, no, Srila Prabhupada, I'm not cold. And every day it was the same. Is he our spiritual master? Is it a bona fide process, a bona fide tradition?
One of the things that I think was very significant was, at the time, we were experiencing, there was, I would say, how would you say, kind of a differences of opinions between God brothers. And I actually followed Srila Prabhupada to Australia at that time, I remember. Now, it was a long time ago. And I remember being on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And he said, all the sannyasis were there, and there was this whole conversation about in the temple, outside of the temple. Whether you could actually be Krishna conscious living outside the temple. I was still at school, actually. So I was outside the temple, but I was coming to the temple on a regular basis, chanting rounds, and had received initiation. So this controversy took place, and all the sannyasis were saying, no, no, you cannot. You have to move into the temple. You have to shave your head. You have to do all of these things. My parents, they weren't that cool on me shaving my head. And when I did, they were pretty nice about it. They said, my mother was like, oh, your curls, you lost your curls. I said, don't worry, Mom, it's going to grow back. So I had the courage on the morning walk. I think it was Madhavisa was there, and I had the courage to step up for a moment there, and I said to Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, there's so many devotees saying that living inside the temple, or that you cannot live outside the temple, that you must live inside the temple. And this has created a little confusion for me. So he stopped in that moment, and in front of all of the sannyasis, he looked at me and he said, inside the temple, outside the temple, always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna, and your life will be sublime. That was one of the moments that I had, first moments that I had with Srila Prabhupada.
The next thing I learned from Prabhupada was how powerful he was and how much he wanted to preach, how much his desire was to bring Krishna to the common man, to everyone. Because in the evening there was a Pandal program. Prabhupada spoke first, and then we left with him, and then after him the other sannyasis, all Mayavadis that were invited. One of them was the Satchitananda from the Shivananda mission in Rishikesh, all impersonalists. So Prabhupada found out that the traveling party I was with, we had a movie projector and a Hare Krishna People movie. And he found out that I was the only one who knew how to work this cinema projector. So he called me into his room and he said, you know how to do the cinema? I said, yes, Prabhupada. He says, good. He says, every evening you stay on the pandal until the last speaker is finished. Then before everybody leaves, you put on the cinema. I said, but Prabhupada, the Mayavadis. He said, don't worry, it will not affect you. So I sat up there, I put up the screen, and in those days there was no TV, there was no satellite communications. So a movie like that was a big thing for the Indian audience. And Prabhupada really liked that movie. It was Yadubar's first movie, and it was actually very, very good for India. We used it for years to make life members.
And after a few months, Prabhupada came back to France, maybe that was the next year, and then I got a phone call, oh, you should come and take Diksha, take second initiation. No. And I was thinking, but I'm not ready. He said, no, you should take the mercy when it comes. So I boarded a train, went to Paris, and then Prabhupada was there. It was actually the only time I was alone with Prabhupada in the room when he gave me Diksha, when he gave me second initiation. And I remember he took his thumb and made me like that, do counting with his hand, with his own hand, showing me like that. Then he gave me the Gayatri mantras. And then I knew that I had to say something, you have to say something to glorify the spiritual master. But I felt like so foolish and a new devotee, like dumb and not knowing anything. So I said, but I have to say something. So I just, out of my foolish head, I thought, all glories to your lotus feet, Srila Prabhupada. And he looked at me and said, Jaw. And that went like straight to my... So I'm just offering like a child, offering like an ugly, tie to his father, and the father accepting because it's offered by the child with affection. So Prabhupada just accepted this like, ugly tie of my dumb words. Oh, glory to your lotus feet. Said, joy. And I just bowed down, mumbled my mantras and retreated out like, what was that?
Again, we were told to go to Srila Prabhupada's room. And then Srila Prabhupada was very charming, and he came and he asked me, what is your name? And then I was thinking I couldn't take part in the initiation. So I told him, Srila Prabhupada, I have no name. So Prabhupada looked puzzled, and he started to laugh. And then he said, you don't like the name your parents gave you? And he had a big, big smile, meaning, I will give you a name you are going to like. And actually he did. Because in the temple at that time, there was one devotee I particularly loved. It was Yamuna Devi. And there was a devotee also who was like a big brother to us. We were doing Harinam all day practically, and at night, where a lot of people were drunk, and he was protecting us like a big brother, Trivikram, now Swami. And then when I received my initiation letter, Srila Prabhupada says, my dear daughter, Mondakini, Devi, I'm very glad, happy to accept you as my initiated disciple. Please, and I'm also very happy that you are appreciating the bliss of Krishna consciousness. And then he said, your name is Mondakini, it's the name of a river, the river Ganges. And I thought, oh, like Yamuna, I got the name of a river. And then he went on explaining that Lord Vamanadev made a little hole in the universe. When he became gigantic, his name was Trivikram. And then the Mondakini fell on the Earth planet. So he connected me with the devotees I really appreciated so much at the time. And I understood later that Prabhupada knew, my wish for that name. And somebody asked Srila Prabhupada, do you know everything? And Srila Prabhupada said, no, I just know what Krishna wants me to know.
There was one lecture that was organized in, I think it was in the Krasnapolsky Hotel, Krasnapolsky, and then just around the corner from the temple and the central, the Dam Square. We hired that, and Prabhupada gave a lecture there with Kirtan. Then we had the Vondelpark. And the most famous moment was the installation of the deities in the Amsterdam temple. We had installation of Jagannath deities. And then that's when an extraordinary event happened. Prabhupada, because the devotees that were there were totally inexperienced. We hardly knew what deities were, what to speak of an installation ceremony. And so one of the devotees there, Kishori, she used to be the wife of my brother, Surabi. And so she in fact was the first one in our family that became a devotee. And so, when there's a fire ceremony, you have to have fruits and everything. But she had turned all the fruits into a fruit salad. So she came with a big, fantastic fruit salad. She was a great cook. But that was not the idea. So Prabhupada got a little upset, he got a little angry because it was so poorly managed and amateurish. And apparently nobody had found out how to do a proper, fire ceremony. A fire jagya. So at one point his eyes were, he was like spewing fire. He said, oh, Prabhupada, he was really angry at the fact that devotees had taken this so lightly, and so It only lasted for a few minutes, but it was intense. You know, we felt personally, so wow. You know, we already knew from Prabhupada's teachings that, you know, he's a spiritual master and we're the humble disciples, you know. There's no question of equality, you know. There's not this kind of Western thing of we're all equal and, you know, maybe you know a little more and you're a guru and I'm a disciple, but I'm equal. You know, that understanding was definitely not there. I mean, the idea of a Vaisnava spiritual master, you know, a pure devotee, that was on a different platform. So we were stunned with awe and respect. And wow, Prabhupada, he was angry. So, you know, we must have done something really bad. But it was over very quickly. And then the temple was packed with people. And it was an old garage that had been converted into a temple. There was no ventilation system, so the walls were dripping with condensation. You know, in terms of facilities, you know, there were no showers for the devotees. We took a shower just with a hose and some cold water in the morning. There was no proper shower. There was only one tap, you know, with cold water coming out, and there was no heating in the winter in that place. So it was a rather austere place to be living in a big city, you know, under those circumstances. So that was really memorable, that moment when the temple was packed with devotees and guests, and there was the fire yagya and the installation of the deities, which, you know, the other thing was that they had built an altar. But in fact, my brother had designed the altar, and there was like a dome on top of it, but the deities were bigger and the dome couldn't fit. So either it was going to be the dome or the deities, but couldn't happen both, you know. So there was another complication, if I remember correctly. But it was resolved and it went through, and yeah, it was a great for all of us.
Another remembrance I have is during a morning walk in New Mayapur, which is nearby. Prabhupada sat in front of what became like the bakery at one old building. And there were two French guys coming from Afghanistan. And they were claimed to be Afghanis, but of course we knew they were French, but they were pretended to be Afghanis, and they were like with turban and everything. And they were asking Prabhupada question because they wanted to be able to follow their own mind. And then they were asking Prabhupada, but can you follow Hinduism and at the same time follow Islam? And they were asking again and again questions, and Prabhupada finally became very sober and he said, no, you choose one path, but actually you don't want to follow anything. And they were completely like, it took the wind out of their sails so much. And then Prabhupada at that time he said, no, to think of Krishna like Mother Yashoda is thinking, is it any difficulty? Then I asked a question at that time. How can we think about Krishna like Mother Yashoda, like you said, or like the Pandavas, he also said. He said, first you have to stop doing nonsense.
I got the service of helping Yamuna Devi in the Pujari room, although I had absolutely no qualification. And that service actually helped me to get rid of most my impersonalism. And during that service, I also learned how to cook for Krishna. And I heard that Srila Prabhupada said, I would like to go to the spiritual world to eat loglu and kachoris. So I became very enthusiastic to learn these two preparations. We had a lot of Bengali ladies coming to London Temple, and they taught me how to do peas, kachori. They taught me loglu and so on. One time in London, Prabhupada came, and he was not feeling so well. Unfortunately, I don't have the date in mind. And somehow or other, Himavati was supposed to cook for him, but she declined. And I was asked to cook for him. So every day, I used to do the basic, Prabhupada wanted, in his brass cooker, he wanted his dal, his rice, 2 sabji, 1 dry, 1 wet, and anything else we could do. You know, bitter melon, but we could add extra preparation. So I was doing everything I learned from the Indian ladies. And one time I made kachoris. So I brought the plate to Srila Prabhupada in his room. And when I came in the room, his eyes became very, very big. And in his eyes, I could see the eyes of the little kid he was in Calcutta, putting kachoris in his pockets. And he says, Mondakini, you made kachoris? And I said, I tried, Srila Prabhupada. And then he obviously he was pleased. But I had no word, I had no feedback. He stayed for about 1 month. And I was wondering, does Srila Prabhupada like it or not? You know, there is no feedback. But the last day, he was going to fly next day. I think it was Shruti Kirti, brought a big list. And he said, Srila Prabhupada wants you to cook all this for the plane. And I saw all the special preparation I had been making. So in this way, I was thinking the spiritual master is actually playing with the disciple to increase the love the disciple has for the spiritual master. And he doesn't keep this love. He's giving this love to his spiritual master and up to the disciplic succession, up to Krishna.
I was already full of respect for Prabhupada, everything that he stood for, you know, just reading his books and everything that I heard from devotees. And I'm not by nature a very sentimental or very devotionally inclined kind of person. I do get impressed with, you know, with respect of impressive personalities. I mean, I was very impressed with Prabhupada. But for me, really the deciding point was always his message, the philosophy. I mean, it's really, like I said, I started off as a Christian, then I became an atheist, and then I started reading Vivekananda and became convinced that God must exist. In fact, it was a very interesting little story. I was reading a book, a magazine called the Aquarian Bulletin. And the Aquarian Bulletin, they did an exercise. So just imagine you build a rocket and you go into outer space, and you just imagine you travel, you travel, you travel, you travel, and you realize there's no end to the universe. Everything is infinite. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, if everything is infinite, then everything is possible. So God is also possible. And that moment I became convinced that God must exist, just by that kind of mental exercise. So, so the philosophy, but then I got stuck in this Mayavadi dilemma. I'm God, fantastic, you know, but why am I here in this world suffering? So Prabhupada, that message for me, that was always the convincing argument, and that really made me intensify the respect I had for Prabhupada. And of course, it was a unique experience, having somebody, you know, of his stature, his age, and the person he was, coming from all the way from India, starting a movement in the Western world, so in a culture that's so totally different from our Western culture. So it is all these things combined, but the bottom line was always, for me, I was convinced about the truth of Vaisnava philosophy as being a sublime philosophy, really finally explaining the dilemma that we are all facing, this existential question: why are we here in this material world?
And I'm really a believer that Prabhupada is to be known in his books. In Vrindavan, when there was a 24-hour kirtan, when I got the 2 a.m. shift, I would notice that his light in his room was on. And he would be sitting, you know, underneath a custom-made mosquito net, translating. So, despite all the management and dealing with the society, he put his best time into writing his books. And to this day, the Prabhupada I know is in the books. One day in Vrindavan, actually, I was walking behind him, and there was a brahmachari reading the Bhagavatam, sitting on the steps. So as Prabhupada went by, he leant over and he tapped him on the head and said, "Good boy." Because there was a controversy with the management. They didn't like us to read. They wanted us to go out and collect or work or whatever. If you read, if you wanted to be a scholar, then there was some resistance. Good boy.
I felt when being in this presence that he was looking into my soul, that we all would just, if we just got one glance from Srila Prabhupada, we felt that our lives were perfected. And so, because I guess I was just a kid, a young boy, I got to be a little forward with Srila Prabhupada. I could walk with Madhavisa on the side. I was always behind us, right behind him, chanting Hare Krishna. Then, the next time I actually got to see Srila Prabhupada was maybe a year later, or even possibly in that same year, when he went to Fiji. He came to New Zealand, and at that time, there was, as I was talking about before, there was this little situation amongst the devotees. One in particular that was Siddha And Siddha had come to the temple, Srila Prabhupada, and had told Srila Prabhupada that he was going to leave the movement because he could no longer work with his god brothers in the way that he was not in favor of the way that book distribution was going, and just the way that things were going in a different sort of direction. In the old days, we would hand out flowers and pieces of incense and simply wonderfuls on the street with "Back to Godhead." And that was our Sankirtan, and of course in the big Sankirtan up on the main road. So there became a sense of separation, and that he was really not in favor of it. And he was very close with Tusta Krishna. In fact, Tusta Krishna was one of his disciples prior to him coming to Srila Prabhupada. And so there was that influence of what we called in those days the Hari Bols. We had the Hare Krishnas and the Hari Bols. And the Hari Bols became followers of Siddha Svarupa and Tusta Krishna, and had allegiance there. And so at this particular time, we were all supposed to go to Fiji. Many devotees had booked their tickets to Fiji, and all of a sudden, this thing happened. And being young devotees, we didn't. For myself personally, I didn't understand the politics of it all. But Siddha Svarupa announced that he would not be going to Fiji, and that he was leaving the Hare Krishna movement. And all of a sudden, there was a kind of a split, you could say. And a lot of the devotees did not go to Fiji. In fact, none of them went to Fiji. They all canceled their ticket. But having a ticket in my hand, and just being a young person, I'm like, I'm going to Fiji. I'm going to go to Fiji with Srila Prabhupada. So all the devotees went to the gate and had the big kirtan departure for Srila Prabhupada. And then Srila Prabhupada went into the airport lounge. So I went through the customs, and I had come a little time later. Srila Prabhupada was sitting there on the seat, and I ran up, "Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada." And he looked up and he said, "Oh, you're coming?" I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm coming." He said, "Very good. Here, you sit right down here. Sit next to me." And he sat me right down beside him. I was just over the hill. It was amazing. And I was so glad that I had made that decision. So we were with Paramahamsa at the time. It was Guru Kripa and Upananda and I'm not sure, there's another devotee there, not coming to me right this moment. But anyway, sitting on the plane, I was back in coach, in economy, and Srila Prabhupada was in first class. The airline hostess actually came back with a plate. She said, there's a very nice elderly man in the front of the plane. He has sent this food back for you. I said, really? Thank you, thank you. So I was, as far as I was concerned, I was in first class. You're my spiritual master. I was having this personal association, and it just having the Mahaprasad of Srila Prabhupada that was personally sent to me, meant to me in a sense that he recognized me, and he was thinking about me, because certainly we were all thinking about him non-stop as our Gurudev. And I truly believe that incidents like that planted the seed, the Bhakti Lata seed in my heart so deeply and profoundly that we're told just a moment's association with this pure devotee can bring us all the way back home, back to Godhead with Krishna.
It was in the same temple in London. Prabhupada had shown Yamuna very simple worship as in Vrindavan, and in Los Angeles, in New Dwarka, it was a little different mood. And one of the first sannyasi we saw came to London, and we did simple worship. Krishna was a person. He was the best friend. So it was not in awe and reverence. It was more spontaneous. And when that sannyasi came, he said, oh, you have to change that deity worship. It's really sentimental. You have to be more in awe and reverence. And I really didn't want to change. I told him that's the way Yamuna showed me. That's the way Prabhupada showed her. We shouldn't change. But there was such a pressure from all the temple president and everybody. I resisted a long time. But after some time, I thought maybe it's better to change. Also, he was saying, the way I show you will be more devotion to your spiritual master. You have to start with the spiritual master, then you offer all the paraphernalia to Krishna. So in the end, I had to be obedient. Then I wrote to Srila Prabhupada. And then Srila Prabhupada was displeased. In the letter he wrote that once you have established a standard to worship the deities, you shouldn't change. And so he was chastising, not in an angry mood, but chastising. But then it was softened by very kind words after. And he said, but I understand that you wanted to serve better your spiritual master, to increase your service to your spiritual master. So this is all right. So that was showing me that even if Srila Prabhupada chastised, he shows great kindness. And it showed me that I should have resisted more, like that.
The other time I saw Prabhupada was in Bombay. I used to have some money, I come from a wealthy family, so I could travel to India regularly. So I arrived in Bombay and I was thinking, oh, let me bring to Prabhupada some nuts that he doesn't find in India. So I brought some hazelnuts. And I went to the kitchen, I asked, the pujari can give me a plate for Prabhupada, and I put those nuts on the plate, and I went up the stairs. Prabhupada was on the roof, giving darshan, and I just came, and I put the plate next to Prabhupada. I bowed down and put the plate next to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada started to take the hazelnuts in his hand, and without touching, Prabhupada would be such an amazing gentleman, he would just pop them into his mouth and looking. And that one Indian, I remember, asked a question, what about the disciples of this one and this one? Prabhupada did not criticize, he said, just ask their disciple. No, not about the disciple. What about this Swami? What about that Swami? Prabhupada said, just ask the disciple. They don't know anything. But ask my disciples, any even new devotee, he can tell you the whole philosophy. Prabhupada was very elegantly and majestically speaking, look, my devotees. Prabhupada was expressing so many times so much appreciation for his disciples. After so many years, some people may have some axe to grind with the GBC or the guru business and everything, but Prabhupada was giving so much credit to his disciples. He was not tolerating, I have to associate with those guys or something. He loved his disciples so much, and he gave them so much credit and so much affection. I was just reading recently the diary of Shutrakriti Prabhu, and this comes out, he's such a gifted devotee to present. You read that book, it's just Prabhupada is right there, so much. Prabhupada had so much affection. I think he conquered us, not so much with philosophy, but with his affection, his compassion, his love.
But that's something that he said in his teachings and in other lectures, when he stated that religion without philosophy is sentimentalism, and philosophy without religion is just aimless mental speculation. And that I found absolutely magnificent. The merger of religion and science, the merger of faith and reason, which has been in the Western world, as we all know, and if you know history, then we know that's been one of the biggest dilemmas and one of the biggest crises in the Western world. If you go back to the history of Christianity, early Christianity, the church fathers like Tertullian, who stated, I believe because it's absurd. So the total rejection of reason, it was not until the 13th century that Thomas Aquinas, who first stated that there's also, the human intellect can also be used for understanding God. But that was kind of revolutionary, because in Christian faith that was not generally understood. Faith is just blind faith, and it's blind faith that will liberate you. And that's not the message that the Vedic philosophy and Srila Prabhupada stated. No, we have, Atata Brahma Jigyasa, we have the human form of life, and the human form of life distinguishes from the animal form of life that we have an intellect, and that intellect is not the workshop of the devil, as Martin Luther called it, for instance. This one of the famous Christian reformers, Protestant reformers, Martin Luther. He said that the intellect is the workshop of the devil. According to Vedic philosophy, the intellect is actually the blessings of Krishna in the human form of life, and that will enable us to understand God also through reason and not just through emotion and sentiment. So that statement of Prabhupada, the merger of religion and science, that they are mutually exclusive. To the contrary, they are mutually totally compatible, and they lie in one another's extension. They're totally compatible, and that message for me was a liberating statement.
I went to Mayapur. Prabhupada came in 1977 for the Gopurnima festival. He gave classes the first couple of days, 2 or 3 days, but then he stopped coming down. He wasn't well. And after the festival, he was on his way to Puri, Bhubaneswar and Jagannath Puri, and he stopped in Calcutta for 2 days. So I was in Calcutta with him. Every evening he would have darshan. So I would sometimes sit, but it was all in Bengali, because he was dealing with some of the most important people in Bengal who were coming to see him. The morning that he was leaving, I was sitting at the veranda opposite his room, waiting to see him go. And Bhavananda Maharaj walked up to me and he gave me a big garland. And he said, Ananda, keep this garland. When I give you the signal, come into Prabhupada's room, you put it around his neck, and I'll put the chandan on his forehead. So I was very happy. I was thinking, wow, I get to put the garland. And 5 minutes went by, Bhavananda came back and he brusquely took away the garland. I changed my mind. My heart went from here to here, you know. I felt so bad I walked out. And Calcutta Temple is on the first floor. And there's a little mezzanine on top of the stairs where they keep the shoes. So we're sitting there lamenting. Suddenly I look up and I see Prabhupada coming out. And everybody's behind him. So he looks at me, I look at him. And we both look down at his shoes, which were on a cushion. So I took the shoes and I put them on his feet. And he walked away. And that was the last time I saw him. And the lesson I got there is that no one can stop your devotion to Guru, to Krishna. No one can come in your way. It doesn't matter how many obstacles they put. I would have been happy to put the garland. I was impeded from doing that. I got a better service of putting the shoes.
So we went to Lotoka and stayed with the Punja brothers, Deoji Punja and Vasudev Punja, and began preparations for laying the foundation stone of the Krishna Kaliya temple there in I think it's in Lotoka. And it was a most amazing experience. Of those 7 days, many days were spent just Srila Prabhupada would be sitting on the porch watching the Fijian people go by with their vegetables or just it was a very cultural thing. Srila Prabhupada was fascinated with the Fijian people because they dark skin, some of them had red hair, and it seemed like he had not seen people like this before. And it was one of those times where sitting on the porch with your grandfather, Srila Prabhupada, just watching the people go, doing people watching. He said I asked him about the situation with Svarupa, Ananda. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, I don't understand. How is it possible that he could leave or want to leave you? And he said, Svarupa is a very nice boy. I like him very much. And he has always wanted his independence. Therefore, I have given it to him. And I said, Srila Prabhupada, I think that you are Mr. ISKCON. And he said, yes, I am Mr. ISKCON. And I said, I can't understand why anybody would want to go away. At that time, I think Madhavisa, he had also moved away. And he said of Madhavisa, he said, I don't care what Madhavisa has done. I just want my Madhavisa back. So Srila Prabhupada cared for all of his devotees. And I don't believe that there was judgment there. His heart connection with us, what he planted in our hearts, was so strong that here I am, now in my 60s, I'm still chanting Hare Krishna. And it was on that recommendation, always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna, and your life will be sublime. So.
Something comes to mind also in the same place in London. Srila Prabhupada was not there, and one day I was doing a article alone, and we had one guest who came regularly. he had very heavy mental difficulties. And that time he came in the room and he started being there. He had flowers he had gathered from the cemetery. And he looked not in a good state that day. And he threw the flowers on the altar. And I thought what to do, you know. But anyway, I went down to clean the dishes. And all of a sudden I heard big noise. So I rushed upstairs and he had actually jumped on the deities and, you know, they were on the floor, lying on the floor. Srimati Radharani's finger or hand was not in good state. So it was like a catastrophe. So I called and everybody came and they took care of the boy. And we brought the deities in Srila Prabhupada's room. So it was like a tragedy, and Prabhupada was so shocked and displeased. And at the time, I shouldn't have gone, I should have stayed, but he didn't chastise me directly. He chastised the temple president at that time. And by Krishna's grace, a sculptor came and he fixed everything very nicely. And by this service, he became a Mahavishnu Swami. But when Prabhupada came to London shortly after that, the deities were resting, but he asked, he was very grave, and he asked to see the deities, to open the curtain. And at that time we had taken the vases out, you know, to make them fresh for when they would wake up. But Prabhupada said, why no vases for the deities, you know, like that. So it showed me how concerned he was, that definitely for Srila Prabhupada, Krishna was not only a murti, Krishna was really present in his form, you know. And if something terrible happened, he was extremely concerned, and he wanted to know if the consciousness of the devotees was right.
Time I remember Prabhupada was in Mayapur during the Gopunim festival. If you remember, we used to do parikram going around the altar with Prabhupada, and there was a bell on the left side like that. And Prabhupada would catch the bell and ring it 3 times. You can't go around like that. And I remember one time Prabhupada took the bell and started to ring 1, 2, 3 and looked behind like that. And then when he looked behind, Prabhupada was beaming with a big smile, and everyone started to jump, you know, in ecstasy. You see all those, and I was impressed. I said, you see all those big guys, big GBC, like grown-up men, just jumping like little kids with that smile of Prabhupada. With that smile, he conquered everyone.
Once in a morning walk in Paris, I asked him a question, but I have to be honest, I don't remember exactly the question. It was something about the spiritual world, you know, do people do they this or that in the spiritual world also? And like we all have questions, like, you know, because that's one of the big revelations of Vaisnava philosophy, that liberation is not just merging into an impersonal ocean of energy and that's it. You know, there is a spiritual world, you know, with cities and planets and individuals and living entities and of course Krishna himself. That of course poses many questions. Wow, that this world that we're living in is kind of like a shadow world and it's just a reflection of the real world, but this looks already very real, this material world, so how can the other world be even more real, and how is it different from the world we're living in? I think I asked a question along those lines. And he said something like, you know, don't speculate too much about it, just chant Hare Krishna. It's like, you know, whoa. And he wrote me a letter once. I was the temple president in Amsterdam. And again, he gave me the same message, you know, just follow the principles, you know, chant Hare Krishna, go out in Harinam. And not chastising, but, you know, don't over don't over depend on your intelligence or on your mental, intellectual capability, but just, you know, keep the focus on devotional service, you know. And it's like putting you back in your place. Don't be proud, don't be humble, you know, and don't think yourself to be whatever. You know, just be the humble servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. Well, I think, by the way, that's another, talking about the essence of Prabhupada's teachings. You know, I said these, you know, religion without philosophy and philosophy without religion, but also we're the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant. You know, that is a message, which of course is not unique to Krishna conscious and Vaisnava philosophy. I mean, that's a message you find in every religion, you know, in every monotheistic religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, in a little different way. You know, we are servants of God. You know, God is a supreme being. Of course, in the Mayavadi philosophy, that takes on a different meaning, because we are in believing that in the end we are God ourselves. So we're kind of serving ourselves. You know, that's kind of a weird concept, but you know, the way that it has been explicitly explained in Vaishnavism. You know, going back, of course, to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You know, humbler than a blade of grass, and you know, this emphasis on humility. But not the kind of artificial, fake humility, but it's really a deep understanding of the metaphysical, existential position of the living entity being a tiny little spark, you know, within the infinite reality, and being, you know, just a tiny little part of Krishna. And just that reality is the fact that we are just a part of an infinite reality, and that we are therefore just a servant. And not just the servant of God, but we are the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of God. And that is so strongly emphasized that you cannot miss it. And that we can also see that this is also the simultaneously a trap, you know, for religious people, that they think, okay, I found something wonderful, you know, God, and an explanation about God and our life in this world. And we start thinking that we become privileged people. And we've seen that in our movement too. You know, devotees start thinking that we are better than the karmis. You know, we start thinking that we are privileged and we are the chosen one, you know. And that spoils everything. It's like making the mistake with the aim of not making that mistake, but while you're trying not to make that mistake, you're doing exactly that, is making the mistake. Forgetting the fact that we are not privileged. Yes, we are privileged, that we have this knowledge, that's true, but it doesn't make us better. It doesn't make us superior. It doesn't make us having to be, you know, having disdain for the so-called non-devotees. I mean, that's something that's really a major threat to any religion, especially when a religion becomes organized and when you have power structures and authority and management and all of that. And, you know, we've seen that in our movement, unfortunately, that people get carried away with that. And that's really something to always remember in terms of the essential teachings of Prabhupada. Just always remember you're the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant.
It was in 76. Prabhupada was sick, and he decided to cancel the trip to New Mayapur, to France from London. And then our leader, Bhagavan Das, said, I will go to London and I will get Srila Prabhupada. But I felt very disobedient. I felt you will never get Prabhupada. I don't want to take the risk. So I just decided to go, no matter what, to London to see Srila Prabhupada. And I convinced another brahmacharini to come with me. Although the temple president, everybody was against it. So we took the boat. When we reached London, Prabhupada was gone to France. So it was a whole-night trip. So we decided we'll go back on the boat. And then when we reached Paris, he had gone to New Mayapur. So we didn't sleep, so tired, exhausted, not in good consciousness. Then reaching New Mayapur, Rikesh Prabhu said, oh, Prabhupada wants you to make catcheries. And I went and I hardly knew my name anymore. I was so exhausted and not in good consciousness, having disobeyed everything. So I went and I did them. And then the servant came and said, Prabhupada didn't like your catcheries. And I could understand that's because of my consciousness. Like the spiritual master is not only testing the food, but he's testing the consciousness. And Prabhupada, they say next, do you want Mondakini to cook for you? Next, Prabhupada says, oh, she didn't do very well. You know, and I understood, yeah, that's my consciousness, he's right, you know. So I learned from that.
Another anecdote is, I think in '75, that was the first time I came back to India as a devotee. And in Mayapur festival, that anecdote is known, but I remember because I was there. Prabhupada came, sat on the Vyasasan, started to chant Jaya Radha Madhava, and suddenly he stopped. And I was next to a big loudspeaker, and then I looked up, and then Prabhupada's forehead was knocking on the microphone like one time. Now I looked up and said, what's happening? And then I said, boom, I heard this like horrible sound in the loudspeaker, like, boom. And it was Prabhupada on his forehead. He tried to control himself, and again, he could not control himself in his ecstasy. So again, his head was knocking, I think 2 or 3 times, and I was horrified. This is a horrible sound. I mean, imagine your guru's head is like knocking on the, it's like he left or something, and I was like, and then the devotees quickly, like, if I remember, came to Prabhupada and then lifted him and took him away. One sannyasi started kirtan just before, just at the same time, and you know the rest of the story. It became a controversy. Was it offense for the sannyasi to do kirtan or that? Because we hear that when Mahaprabhu went into trance and his disciples, his followers would do kirtan to bring him back. And I heard, and I read, and I was not there in the room, when Prabhupada, when he was asked, he said, oh, I don't do that very often in such a humble way. We had such a out of this world spiritual master. So much humility, so much compassion, so much love, so much authority. Those things, there was no doubt. Afterwards, unfortunately, when the guru business, quote unquote, started, then people and some gurus fell down. Then came the question, is he bona fide or not? But with Prabhupada, that question that never crossed your mind even. I had a spiritual master before in India, like I said, the first disciple of Yogananda, the famous Paramahamsa, autobiography of a yogi. So I was in his ashram, and he was a very powerful yogi. He would go into trance, and we used to massage his body, and we'd say, oh, he's gone. And after a few hours, he'd come back, okay, now he's back there. So I had that impression, but Prabhupada was like way beyond any kind of yogic, power like that. He was so impressive. From the first time, from the first time I saw his picture in the magazine, I was impressed. He said, so much humility. He looks so powerful, but so humble at the same time. The first, color magazine, Color Back to Godhead in French.
In London, Yamuna Devi was gone, and serving the Shishurada London Ishvara was so perfect. My consciousness was becoming cleaner of this Mayavadi philosophy. I could see Krishna was really a person. But then there was, in my heart, there was like a strong desire to help with the preaching. So we had a very sweet and funny relationship and exchanges with Srila Prabhupada when he was coming to London. And that shows actually how he would relate to very young lady devotees, to young girls. Prabhupada was often asking me, I did not want to get married at that time at all. So anytime there was a proposal, I will just put the worst sari in the world and put a face very, very sad, very grave, and people will leave me alone. And Prabhupada, when he used to come, he used to say, Mondakini, you're not married yet. And he used to laugh. And then he would say, you didn't find anybody good enough for you? And I would become all red, and he would laugh. And so one day we heard the most amazing thing, that Srila Prabhupada was in Moscow. And I remember becoming, I thought I was very proud of Srila Prabhupada. I thought he's so brave, because we had read so many books about what happened behind the Iron Curtain, how dangerous it is. Even if you slightly say a word against Stalin, you would go to camp, to jail. And I thought Prabhupada is amazing. He's really Abhay Charan, fearless at the lotus feet of Krishna. And I remember thinking, that's a country I will probably never go. And meanwhile, Prabhupada left Moscow, and then he came to Paris first, then he came to London. And I was doing some menial service for him. One devotee said, Mondakini, Prabhupada wants to see you. And I thought I made a mistake in my service, so I knocked. And Prabhupada said, come in. And I came, and he had a big, big smile. Shyamasundar was standing near him. And he says, come close. I offered my obeisances. He said, come closer. And then he looked at me with a beautiful smile. And I remember always in the same way. He talked to me in the way he would ask me to go and get some potatoes across the street. And he said, Mondakini, would you like to go to Moscow and to marry this boy, Anatoly? And by the grace of Lord Chaitanya, you can assist the mission there. And what I have to tell you is that before that, when that desire for spiritual life, before that, when that desire to take part in the preaching mission came in my heart, I had read in one of Srila Prabhupada's purports that if the spiritual master is asking you to do a task a little difficult, and if you say yes immediately, you will make a lot of spiritual progress. So I was very young, I was 21 at the time. So I ran to Shri Shri Radhanandanishvara, and I knew they were person, real person, and they could help. So I prayed and I said, please, please, my dear Lord, can you arrange it? Can you make an arrangement so that Srila Prabhupada would ask me to do something a little difficult, but please, please remind me to say yes. And then when Srila Prabhupada asked about, would you go to Moscow and marry this boy, Anatoly? I was just shocked for half a second, but I remembered my prayer, and I looked at him and I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And his smile became, like we say, oceanic. And he told Shyamasundar, now you arrange everything. So that was the beginning of that beautiful saga of going to Moscow. And Srila Prabhupada would ask, when we met, he would ask what's happening there. He would be very enlivened when I was telling him. But he wanted me to actually to marry Anatoly, who became Ananta Shanti Prabhu, and to get a residential permit. But somehow or other, the KGB knew about our mission and would never give the residential permit. The longest I went was 2 weeks, and the shorter visa I got was 2 days. And at one point, Srila Prabhupada said not to go anymore because he said Europe is sure and Moscow, it can be risky, it's not sure. So, but one realization I got from that, Prabhupada knew they wouldn't give the residential permit. But when he told me that, I was so attached to that mission. And I loved the people there, the spiritual seekers. They were ready to give up their lives, their health, their freedom, just for spiritual life. And so I told Srila Prabhupada, can I try another time? Maybe I will get the residential permit. And Srila Prabhupada was so kind as usual. And he says, he knew I wouldn't get. And when I went the last time, it became clear it was not time to go back, you know. But Prabhupada said, of course you can go back. Yeah, try, you know. Always kind, delicate, encouraging, never discouraging the devotees. Always encouraging the devotees. At the time, you know, we were quite fanatical. So when I met Ananda Shanti Prabhu, I told him, you know, Prabhu, actually sex life is only to have children. So he said, oh, Haribol. And then I had heard that, so I told him, and you know, in order to have children, we have to be pure devotees. You know, I was not mature. I was just 21, and having been a brahmacharini for almost 2 years, that's what I thought, you know. So, Haribol. But we had a very nice, sweet relationship. That was the mission of Srila Prabhupada. So we didn't really, you know, we were not like husband and wife, like intimate relationship like that. But we felt I was very happy. And it was really Prabhupada, you know, like Prabhupada was always present. So Ananda Shanti was a wonderful young boy. He was very educated. He had studied philosophy, and he knew also the philosophy from India before meeting Srila Prabhupada. He was speaking in English. So he took this mission very, very seriously. He met Srila Prabhupada only for 2 days. But Shyama Sundar said he never saw Prabhupada giving so much to one person. They talk about Vanashram Dharma. Anatoly then asked Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, in order to preach Krishna consciousness, should I become a pope? And Prabhupada laughed and said, it's not necessary. And then he asked Srila Prabhupada, before leaving, it would be good for me to have a Western wife. This is how it came to be. So what Ananda Shanti was doing, he would approach friends. You couldn't preach directly, you know, to people in the street. Would you like me to tell some of his preaching activities, how he was doing? So, for example, he had the Srimad Bhagavatam that I brought to Moscow with the help of Srila Prabhupada and Krishna. It was such an adventure. And he would sit on the table in a coffee in summer and open Srimad Bhagavatam at the pages with the pictures, the beautiful paintings. And people would be very attracted. They never saw such pictures. So they would say, what is that? Can you tell us? And he would say, sit down, I'm going to explain to you. So they they would sit and police wouldn't see, you know. That was one way. Another way, when there was no books, devotees in Russia at that time had absolute faith in Prasadam. So he would dress very nicely, he would buy a bouquet of red roses, he will offer to Krishna, and then he will go out in the street and approach the people and tell them, smell this rose, at least you will get a human form of life. And police would come, what are you doing, what are you doing? He would say, today I'm in love and I want to share this love with everybody. So the police would laugh and he would carry on distributing the roses. Another thing he did, he made a scientific institute. He registered a scientific institute. Because actually at that time and still now in the Soviet Union, science was God. They haven't had a university of atheism. So because it was a scientific institute, it got registered without any problem. So what was the goal of this institute? It was to test the power of Vedic mantra on plants, animals, and human beings. So when you would go into this institute, you would have a lot of green plants, you would have a few cats and dogs, and you would have a lot of devotees chanting Hare Krishna. That was the way he was actually doing his preaching mission. Another way, I always say not to be imitated by a brahmachari. He would dress very nicely and go to a place where young boys and girls were dancing. And soon enough, some girls would be interested. So he would say, after some time, he would tell them, would you come home? We can discuss more. And they would say, yes, I want to come. So they would go to the little flat he was sharing with his mother, and then he will preach from Srimad Bhagavatam. Also, a big international book fair was arranged in Moscow with the help of Gopal Krishna Goswami, Kirtiraj, Prabhu, and for the first time all of Srila Prabhupada books were at this international fair in Moscow. So that's the way Ananta Shanti would preach, and he would travel all over Russia as much as he could. And he was a very unusual personality. For example, he would say, I come on Monday at such time. He would come 2 or 3 days later. He would say, time is eternal. Then he would start preaching, talking about Bhagavad Gita, very, very powerfully for maybe 7 hours. And when people got used to that, they used to bring their sleeping beds, their prasadam while listening to the lecture. You know, he was very powerful. But then persecution started a few years later.
The quality that was most significant with Srila Prabhupada, that he looked upon you with unconditional love. There was no barrier, there was no shield, or there was no barrier, no mask, that he would look with love and compassion upon every single one and be totally present. He was so very present that it was undeniable for me. There was no, just hearing his name. I think that we have a connection with our Gurudevs from previous lives. I really do. I'm a very strong believer in that we kind of pick up from wherever we left off. And it was when you meet a character like Srila Prabhupada and your heart opens in his presence, despite all things going on around him. To me, that was the indication that he was my guru. I didn't know him. I didn't know that I knew him. But somehow or other, there was this resonance in my heart that said, yes, he's the one. I didn't even know what a guru was. I had no concept. You know, I didn't live in a life. I wasn't growing up in a world where I was suffering. I feel like I'm a natural devotee. I wasn't really looking for anything. You know, Hare Krishna stood across the street as us as young kids would laugh at them, giving out incense sticks and simply wonderfuls. But that mercy of Srila Prabhupada, the acceptance of everyone, to me, was a quality that I could not deny, I could not overlook, that I resonated with in my being. So no matter how far I fall from the path, or I stray from the path, or I look anywhere, I always come back to Krishna. I have Srila Prabhupada to thank for that. So that's how it's affected me. It's affected everything that I do. I sing English songs from a bhakti place, call and response in English. And people respond. And I throw Krishna's names in there, and they all respond. Can I get a hallelujah? Hallelujah. Can I get a Hare Krishna? Hare Krishna. Can I get a Hare Rama? Hare Rama. They're all excited about it. And so I'm available to go as deep as they want to go. And I will always refer them to our beloved Srila Prabhupada.
I think the quality which attracted me most to Prabhupada, you know, like I think I mentioned, was his compassion. It was like emanating from every pore of his being. So much compassion. No, he was not tirelessly repeating, no, again with so much patience, the same basic stuff to try to make us understand, you know, who we were, you know, what was our predicament and what we were supposed to do to get out of it. But I think what was most striking for me was his compassion. And also, he was speaking with so much authority. I mean, he was not making up something for you. When he was speaking, it was like, there was no like, well, no, I don't know. No, it was like, he was always quoting so much, you know, Shastra, of course. But the way he was speaking, he spoke with, as someone who knew. Not someone who had heard, someone who had read, someone who knew. Everything he spoke, he had realized. And that gave so much weight. Like if I tell you, you're not the body, you say, yeah, sure. But Prabhupada said, you're not the body, it like hit you like a fist, you know, like, yeah, I'm not the body.
What impressed me the most about Prabhupada was his complete selflessness, his infinite compassion, his complete dedication to helping the suffering souls, to helping humanity. And also the fact he had perfect knowledge. He had an answer for any problem. He had a remedy, not only for the personal problems of his disciple, but he had the perfect peace formula for the whole world. And his infinite kindness. Complete knowledge, extreme kindness, mysticism. We could feel that wonderful mysticism. Actually, being near Srila Prabhupada, we could see that he was opening for us a little window on the spiritual world. The spiritual world, God became so real in Srila Prabhupada's presence. It was very possible to reach perfection. In the beginning, when I joined, just a month after I joined, I remember Tamal Krishna Goswami told me, Mondakini, in 3 years, we are all going to become pure devotees. We were convinced, just by following Srila Prabhupada, perfection will be very quickly attained.
He was the mouthpiece of Paramatma. He directly knew what was going on in your heart. When he spoke, it wasn't just him, it was Krishna speaking through him, telling me what I needed for my spiritual advancement. Knowledge is the most important thing. Like a judge, he makes his opinion when he has the knowledge from both sides. He hears the prosecution, he hears the defense, and then he makes a decision. Now, who's more knowledgeable than Krishna? He's in our heart. He knows what we're carrying, the baggage we're carrying from who knows how many millions of births. And Prabhupada was his direct representative, and it was very clear to me that he knew exactly what I needed for my spiritual advancement. Exactly. Even now that I'm struggling, I'm kind of isolated, I do give classes and I love the devotees, I still feel that he's there, that the suffering I'm going through is for my own benefit. It's nothing more, nothing less. If anything, it's being diminished so that I can handle it. So that's one thing with Prabhupada. He could read your mind. And we know that even he said that his books were an expression of Krishna, actually. Krishna was writing. Like Baladev Vidyabhushan with Govinda Bhasya. Govinda Dev instructed him what to write. And that's the quality of a guru, that he is that connected with Paramatma, with Krishna, that he cannot give you any bad advice.
But one thing that's overriding, and at least the way I look at him as a disciple, is his total dedication to his mission and to his role. And he was not doing it for self-glorification. That you could see there was not an inch there of anything related to presenting himself in a way that would be appealing to people, that he would be popular or appreciated or liked. Not that he didn't care about that, but that was not his motivating force. His motivating force was to really, his intense sense of compassion for, the fallen souls in this material world. And he said that many times. There's one other devotee, a lady, she said once that she was with Prabhupada in London, and they were walking down Oxford Street, and Prabhupada made some comment like, I don't know if I'm quoting it correctly, but made some comment like that. He says, look at all these people, they're all suffering, And if you, of course, you walk down Oxford Street, you see a lot of happy people and, people drinking and whatever, and apparently having a good time, or maybe not, but it doesn't look that dramatic. But, when you're in that state of consciousness and you're looking at it from the bigger picture, Vaikuntha, back right down to planet Earth in Kali Yuga. That's, the big overwhelming, step. And he explained that step. You could see that was his mindset, that he was looking at it from the biggest possible picture, all the way down, focusing into the very narrow reality that we're here, walking down Oxford Street in London, planet Earth. That's remarkable. That's really remarkable. I mean, it's stunning, and it shows that he was driven by the compassion for helping, and he said it when he started his mission. If I can just save one, soul going back to Krishna, then my mission will be considered accomplished. So that kind of attitude, I mean, that's overwhelming. I mean, you think about it, it's really heartwarming, that there are persons like that have that kind of mentality and that drive to save people from, from hell. Even though we don't always see it like that. But he was completely seeing it like that.
Je anilo